Greetings, I bid to both panels, Dr. Muhammad Jalani Hassan and Dr. Mangaleswaran Anamalai. I'm Ainul Tasnim binti Anwar from TESOL 2 Semester 8 and my thesis supervisor is Madam Noliza binti Abdul Razak. Today I'm going to present my research report entitled The Effectiveness of Cooperative Learning in Enhancing Year 4 English Writing Performance in SK to Jiring. Is the background of the study. Poor command of English among students need to be addressed by all parties as English has become among the prominent language used globally. Among the objective of Malaysia's Ministry of Education is for the teachers to execute more holistic teaching and learning approach in their schools. Since then, the teachers were trying to switch the students from the traditional learning method into something more holistic to prepare students for the future challenging world. A study conducted by Crozier 2012 has proved that language learning can be enriched, and a highly convenient method is by using cooperative learning. Pelov and Pratt 2010 stated that cooperative learning is used as an alternative to traditional learning as it effectively promotes cognitive and affective outcomes, increases academic performance, and helps to develop social skills that are required in society. Cooperative learning environment allows the students to work together in a group to achieve the stipulated learning outcome. Therefore, it is clear that cooperative learning has been accepted abroad and therefore deserves to be practiced in Malaysia. Next is the statement of problem. The researcher intended to study the effects of practicing the cooperative learning principles by looking at the students' writing performance in SK Jiring Kuala Nerus, Terengganu, Malaysia. Although many types of research associated with cooperative learning had been conducted, but a study has never been carried out in primary school in East Coast, specifically Terengganu. In most schools or the workshop, cooperative learning has long been introduced. However, involvement of students in cooperative learning are still less noticeable than other learning strategies. Slavin 2011 mentioned that cooperative learning method focuses on team goals and team success. However, most teachers are less concerned with the use of various teaching methods because they are too focused to complete the syllabus and the mastery techniques for examination. Thus, this study was carried out to fill up the gap in the research field in which to see whether cooperative learning can influence English writing performance for Year 4 in primary school in Terengganu or not. The purpose of this study is to find out to what extent does cooperative learning effective in enhancing Year 4 English writing performance in SK Jiring Kuala Nerus, Terengganu by using a quasi-experimental research design. Next, there are three research objectives that the researcher wanted to find out. First was to identify the significant differences in students' English writing performance between integrated cooperative learning classroom and non-integrated cooperative learning classroom. The second objective was to identify the relationship between teachers' level of cooperative learning implementation with students' attitudes in English writing lessons. And the third objective was to identify the students' interest in English writing lessons using cooperative learning. There are also three research questions derived from the research objectives. The first question was, what are the significant differences in students' English writing performance between integrated cooperative learning classroom and non-integrated cooperative learning classroom? The second was, what is the relationship between teachers' level of cooperative learning implementation with students' attitudes in English writing lessons? And the last one is, does student interested in English writing lessons using cooperative learning? Next is significance of the study. According to Abrami 2015, he stated that traditional English teaching values quantitative evaluation since it believes that quantitative evaluation is relatively objective. In contrast, Bell 2016 mentioned that qualitative methods can be used for cooperative learning evaluation, such as face-to-face interview, questionnaire, growth file, as well as situational tests. Through these methods, students' growth and development during cooperative learning can be evaluated objectively and comprehensively. Moreover, cooperative learning implementation in the classroom is interactive, whereby students need to be engaged with one another so that they become active participants in the learning. Cooperative language learning performs instructional activities, mainly group work, to engage learners in communication, involving processes like information sharing, negotiation of meaning, and interaction, said Fuchs 2010. Besides, cooperative learning allows discussions and critical thinking so students learn more and remember what they have learned for a longer period. The requirement for the students to learn Working together is actually an important skill for their future. Reviewing the related past researchers, some of them agreed that cooperative learning contributes to students' performance. Meanwhile, some disagreed. Hence, these past studies provide gaps for the researcher to conduct the study. According to Iqbal 2004, cooperative learning is considered effective as a teaching learning technique for mathematics as compared to the traditional teaching method. Students in cooperative groups outscore the students working in the traditional learning situation. It is supported by COSA 2013, whereby he investigated the effects of cooperative learning on the achievement of 7th class students in the subject of social studies using quasi-experimental. In this experiment of 2 weeks, the group of cooperative learning resulted in higher achievement when compared to the routine method of teaching social studies. However, Rafiq 2010 found a few weaknesses in cooperative learning methods. The disadvantage faced by teachers when implementing cooperative learning is the teacher's ability to control the class during the learning session. For instance, lack of direction and guidance from the teachers can cause behavioral problems, such as students did not want to socialize or group members want to talk at the same time. Hence, cooperative learning would be a waste of time. Westworth 2007 said another arising issue worth to be looked at was over-reliance on a certain member of the group. This is because cooperative learning can make students become dependent on each other and give negative effects when they are required to work individually. Pastorella 2011 said. Thus, the above studies mention that teachers in effective classroom management can become obstacle to that prevent the students to get full benefits of cooperative learning. Thus, it can be concluded that there are gaps to be filled by conducting this study. Next is the research design. This research employed a quasi-experimental where it involved the creation of comparison groups, namely experimental group and control group. The experimental group is manipulated or exposed to the intervention, whereby in this study the intervention is the integration of cooperative learning in writing lessons. On the other hand, the control group is used as a baseline measure. It is similar on the experimental group in terms of their grade level and mental ability, with the exception of not receiving the treatment or the experimental manipulation that the experimental group received. Pre-test and post-test were also administered to both groups. Comparisons of performance across pre-test and post-test were restricted to the data of 50 subjects for both experimental and control group of the research. Next is population and sample. The population of this study consisted of 935 students at SK Tok Jiring, Kuala Nerus, Terengganu, Malaysia. However, out of the population, this study only involved 2 classes of Year 4 students in the year 2019. Purposive sampling was used in the study where it is a form of sampling which determines similar traits or specific characteristics of the participants. In this study, the samples for the experimental group is 25 students, same as for the control group, also 25 students. There are 4 instruments used for data collection, namely pre- and post-test, teachers' questionnaire, semi-structured interviews, and observation checklists. More details on these instruments will be presented in the upcoming slides. As for the research procedures, this study was divided into 3 phases, namely pre-assessment phase, experiment phase, and also post-assessment phase. In the pre-assessment phase, pre-test was administered for both experimental group and control group. The score for both groups was evaluated for further analysis. The results serve as the independent variable for comparing the results of the assessment after the intervention has been done. Next is the experiment phase. Most of the data were collected during this period. For the experimental group, the researcher explained cooperative learning concept before starting the experiment. Then, the cooperative learning-based activities were implemented during the English writing lessons for the whole 10 weeks. Integration of cooperative learning elements also were included. The lessons were reviewed after classes as part of revision and reflection. Meanwhile, for the control group, the students experienced traditional classroom teaching and learning within the same duration as the experimental group. The learning activities were mostly individual tasks. Furthermore, observation was conducted in the entire 10 weeks of lessons to identify students' interests towards the cooperative learning implementation during English writing lessons. On the other hand, semi-structured interview was conducted in between the 9th weeks of the experiments, which was done after the school hours to prevent interruption of lessons. About 15 to 20 minutes was taken to interview each interviewee chosen during the interview session. Lastly, teachers' questionnaires were distributed to selected English teachers in the fifth week. The respondents were asked to read the statements given and choose their answers based on four Likert scale range from 4 strongly agree, 3 agree, 2 disagree, and 1 strongly disagree. Next is the data collection procedure. For the pre and post test, the questions were adapted from the Ujian Penilaian Sekolah Rendah UPSR Paper 2 focusing on writing components. The examination took 1.5 hours. Format and period of the test were the same for both pre-test and post-test. The pre-test was administered to both groups at the same time before the experiment. The post-test was administered to both groups after the experiment after the 10th week. As for semi-structured interviews, they were conducted with 3 English teachers and selected students from both control group and experimental group of SK Jiring. The interview was done in the 9th week. There were 10 questions with which questions for the teachers differ from the students. Meanwhile, for the teachers' questionnaire, the questions were given through Google Form. The questionnaires link and instructions were given to English teachers. The period of responding was 3 days. After this period, the questionnaire no longer could be answered. The respondents' answers and identities were confidential. The data collected will be analyzed using SPSS version 22. Lastly, observation checklist was prepared to investigate students' interests and attitudes for both experimental and control group. The observation checklist includes the students' participation, nonverbal signs, and psychological variables. The observation was conducted in the entire 10 weeks of lessons. Next is the data analysis procedure. For the pre and post test, teachers evaluate experimental group and control group scores for both tests. The marks differences for pre-test and post-test of both groups were calculated. Then they were analyzed using independent sample t-test in SPSS version 22 to get the descriptive statistics, which was the mean for the mark differences. The means were interpreted to compare the students' performance for both groups. As for semi-structured interviews, they were analyzed using inductive qualitative analysis, specifically narrative analysis. Based on Cornell 2013, narrative analysis involved making sense of the interview's respondents' individual opinion or thoughts. It helps to highlight the important aspect of the respondents' information given during the interview, as well highlight the critical points that have been found in the other areas of this research. Meanwhile, for the teacher's questionnaire, the answers were analyzed using SPSS version 22 to find independent t-test, ANOVA, multiple linear regression, Persian product moment correlation. As for the observation, the findings were accumulated, then they were analyzed deductively. According to Lucas 2016, deductive analysis means the researcher already had a predetermined framework for the data analysis. The researcher would build the evaluation form based on the pre-existing theories, concept, or hypothesis of the research to be used as the predetermined framework. The researcher needed to only map the connection of the observation in the checklist to specific categories based on the other teacher's observation. For the theoretical framework, Vygotsky 1978 presented a social cognition theory that is relevant to this study. This theory was first developed to explain the way humans learn a language. His main point is that cognitive development resulted from a process where a child learns through shared problem solving with a peer. Thus, social interaction plays a key role in cognitive development. This theory contributed to the build of cooperative learning together model by Johnson and Johnson in 1994. The model consisted of 6 elements, namely positive independence, equal participation, individual accountability, simultaneous interaction, interpersonal and small group skills, and group processing. They said that when these 6 elements being integrated into the cooperative learning, it will help in boosting students' achievement. Findings for the first research question showed that there was a tremendous increment in students' writing performance as the means of mark differences for experimental group was higher than control group. For the second research question, the findings showed that teachers practicing good cooperative learning teaching practices increased the level of cooperative learning implementation. Consequently, students' attitudes was boosted in the English writing lessons. For the third question, the findings showed that students had a deep interest towards the lessons when cooperative learning was implemented. Next is data discussions. For the first research question, there was an increment in the number of students who scored higher marks for the experimental group. It showed that the students' performance had improved a lot after 10 weeks of treatment. According to Davis 2009, from Vygotsky's social interaction theory, when pupils study in cooperative groups with the help of their peers' operation, it will enable them to reach their own potentials compared to self-learning. Another research done by Bravo 2010 in investigating the utility of cooperative learning in coping with the writing skills at the tertiary level showed that the participants had good opinions about cooperative learning as the effective strategy of how to learn the writing skills. For the second research question, the questionnaire findings showed practices variable contributed significantly to cooperative learning effectiveness, which accounted for 66%. The interview findings showed respondents' teaching practices helped them to execute effective cooperative learning. They planned their lessons beforehand to see which cooperative learning methods suitable to be used different cooperative learning strategies such as jigsaw, small group learning, and project-based learning, as well as handled the problems that occurred during the lessons professionally. Thus, it is evident that they have a high level of cooperative learning implementation, which gives a positive impact on students' attitudes toward cooperative learning. A study conducted by Siti Mazhar 2010 found that traits shown by instructors play an important role in providing incentives for students to participate in class discussions. Various traits were such as being supportive, approachable, responsive to students' questions, and others. For the third research question, the findings showed more than half of the students showed definite interest in English writing lessons using cooperative learning. The interest indicators such as students were engaged in doing the work, able to mutually exchange ideas with one another, gave good responses when asked about their work and comprehension of the learning. The majority of the students also seemed to be more relaxed and at ease during the lessons. The respondents also could see the benefit in writing when they said they could finish writing tasks faster when working with their friends. Slavin, 1983, stated one factor that influences the success of cooperative learning is the positive motivational impact from the peer support during learning. So in conclusion, cooperative learning integrated classroom is a success. Students' achievement increases with the condition that the learning objectives must be clear and parallel pedagogy approach that related to cooperative learning theory is incorporated. Based on the questionnaire findings, it showed that teachers have a high level of cooperative learning implementation, which attributed to students' positive attitudes in English writing lessons. It was supported by the interview findings whereby the respondents agreed at the notion of seeing positive attitudes in students when they integrated cooperative learning. Based on the observation findings, students showed a deep interest in cooperative learning by being highly responsive and is engaged with the lessons. The interview findings also supported the statement whereby the students mentioned that they became more active when they were working in the presence of their friends' support. For the recommendation, the first one is to incorporate the use of technology into cooperative learning. The data set for this study did not include the use of online course formats. For years, various stakeholders in education have been weighing the potential benefits of technology in education against its risks and consequences. One significant opportunity is to study the impact of cooperative learning using technology. This type of study will fill an important gap in the literature of online cooperative learning. Looking at the advantages of technology in education, it seems like blended learning, whereby students' curriculum is partially delivered in person and partially via digital, is expected to produce greater results. The second recommendation is to implement cooperative learning in multi-diverse contexts. The study cannot be generalized to all primary school students because the samples were not chosen randomly and there was an overrepresentation of national schools. Thus, future research can be done in multi-ethnic schools. It would have been beneficial to interview teachers from more diverse schools. Thus, it is possible to create a full picture of the attitudes held by the teachers regarding ethnically heterogeneous grouping. Future research could also be conducted as in a large-scale survey that would gather information on the teacher's perceptions in using cooperative learning for ethnically heterogeneous groupings. This would provide the evidence required to determine if there are any patterns or correlations between the effectiveness of cooperative learning implementation and multi-diverse background. The third recommendation is to narrow down the use of specific cooperative learning strategy. The study employed various cooperative learning strategies that deemed as suitable for the particular topics and lessons to be taught on that day. Thus, future studies might consider investigating a more carefully designed cooperative learning strategy. Although there is no one-size-fits-all, it is great to discover more about the implications of using only one specific cooperative learning strategy in the classroom. The study gives impact towards the students in schools by giving them chances to develop their various skills through the activities conducted using cooperative learning strategies. The skills are such as leadership skills, teamwork skills, communication skills, conflict management skills, and decision-making skills. Apart from that, the study findings also showed the importance of teachers' involvement, although cooperative learning mainly centered on students. This is because teachers are the catalysts responsible as facilitators. Thus, teachers should well plan the suitable cooperative learning strategy for the students in the teaching learning process to engage the students. Furthermore, the application of cooperative learning significantly improves the academic achievement of the learner, which enhances the chances of cooperation among students, helping each other in academics, and such an attitude mitigates the effects of unhealthy competition among students for grades and marks.